Well, why don't we get started here? I want to welcome everybody for joining the Innovation and Commercialization Keynote with Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath. This is the last day of Research Week. I've focused today on innovation and commercialization. And I want to start off by thanking everyone who's made the OHSU Research Week such a fabulous week of events this year. I want to also give a special thank you to the sponsors of today's events, which include the Oregon Bioscience Association, the law firm of Lee and Hayes, the law firm of Stoll Reeves, and the law firm of Stern, Kessler, Goldstein, and Fox. So after today's keynote today, from Dr. McMurry-Heath, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. So feel free to put your questions into the chat anytime during the presentation, and I will read them and pose them to her in the question and answer period. I think we're all used to the regular rules for presentations like this. Be sure to mute your microphone. Turn your video off, please. And I also want to remind everybody that this event is being recorded, although I don't see that it is being recorded yet, so somebody needs to start recording it. So to introduce today's speaker, I want to first introduce Dr. Danny Jacobs, our president of OHSU, to give the introduction. Danny, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Peter, Dr. Bartlesby. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. So research, of course, is one of our university's core missions, and it directly contributes to our mission to improve the health and well-being of others, especially folks here in Oregon. So I think it's fair to say that groundbreaking research at OHSU drives scientific knowledge. That certainly is our aspiration. But through collaboration, we believe we are greatly able to expand the impact of our discoveries and the impact our innovations have on those we serve. In that regard, the biotechnology industry is an important stakeholder and partner for OHSU, and it helps us develop and deliver new therapies, diagnostics, and other biomedical innovations that help us provide the very best care for patients. So OHSU, as Dr. Bartlesby referenced, in partnership with the Oregon Bioscience Association and some of our sponsors, is terrifically honored to welcome Dr. Michelle McMurry-Heath, President and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, also known as BIO. BIO represents 1,000 life science companies and organizations from 30 countries. The organization's mission is to support companies that discover and deploy scientific breakthroughs that improve human health, environmental stewardship, and sustainable agriculture. Dr. McMurry-Heath became the leader of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO, as president and CEO on June 1st, 2020. A physician and molecular immunologist by training, Dr. McMurry-Heath became just the third chief executive to steward the world's largest biotechnology advocacy group since BIO was founded in 1993. A common thread in her work across academia, government, and industry has been a focus on broadening access that benefits more patients and patients from more diverse backgrounds. I am informed that, driven in no small part by her own past family experiences navigating clinical trials and funding uncertainties, Dr. McMurry-Heath describes, and I quote, "The distribution of scientific progress is the social justice issue of our age," close quote. She came to BIO from Johnson & Johnson, where she served as global head of evidence generation for medical device companies, and then was vice president of global external innovation and global leader for regulatory sciences. She was also instrumental in bringing J&J's incubator, J-Labs, to Washington, D.C. She led a global team of 900 people with responsibilities in 150 countries around the globe. Before her time at J&J, Dr. McMurry-Heath was also a key science policy leader in government. The Obama-Biden transition team tapped her to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the National Science Foundation's policies, programs, and personnel. President Obama then named her Associate Science Director of the FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health under Commissioner Peggy Hamburg. In that role, she championed clinical trial evolution, the use of real-world evidence and product evaluation, and urged us to embrace the patient's voice in health research, so new medical products would deliver outcomes that matter to them. Dr. McMurry-Heath received her MD and Ph.D. from Duke as a member of their renowned medical scientist training programs, and she was the first African-American to graduate from that prestigious program. She spent 12 years working as a bench researcher before taking the policy and leadership roles in government and industry that I described. So I will summarize by saying I think we are very fortunate to have her with us today, and I know we all very much look forward to hearing her presentation. So please help me welcome Dr. McMurry-Heath, please.
Dr. Jacobs, you're too kind. Thank you so much for that introduction. And more importantly, I want to thank everyone listening who's played a part in our fight against COVID. I know that cases have increased recently in Oregon, and the last thing we all want is another wave, but I have no doubt that Oregonians are better off thanks to your commitment to their health and welfare. So thank you. You know, we've learned a lot over the past year, and what has shined throughout the pandemic is how science and research, quite simply, saves lives. It's science that I want to focus on today. Science wasn't always treated fairly in recent years. Some people like to give it a bad name, and I'll be honest, science can't answer every question about life. But science is going to lead our journey to a better society. There is a bio-revolution brewing. Advances in health, agriculture, the environment, and many other fields are going to launch our society forward, and we should all be excited about that. Yet, scientific advancements cannot help just a privileged few. To build a better society for all, science and biotechnology, which is what we focus on, must reach deep into communities in ways that are just, impactful, and inclusive. The health of underprivileged communities and communities of color must be part of any effort that our nation has to build back better. Because if COVID taught us anything, it's that we are all in the same ocean, but we aren't necessarily riding in the same boat. Some ships are leaking while others plow ahead. So as we recover, we need to build stronger boats that can carry more people safely to shore. You know, growing up, I saw my parents working to build better boats. My father spent his career designing mental health programs for people who couldn't afford them. My mother ran public health nursing for Alameda County in California, which included Oakland and Berkeley. And during my teenage years, I was blessed to be able to hear her talk with low-income women about how to avoid HIV infection or reduce infant mortality. Later in life, I had a decision to make, whether to become a doctor or a researcher. And it was a difficult choice, but in the end, I did my typical and split the difference and tried to combine those two worlds through an MD PhD. That decision to try to serve the community through direct care while also pursuing new discoveries helped me realize just how many families our society was leaving behind, not just by healthcare, but by the pursuit of new scientific discoveries. I remember children coming into the ER with asthma or diabetes, and we could treat them, but we knew that they needed broader solutions. Who was cleaning up the air that they breathed? Who was working on new treatments for diabetes? How could we get them access to the nutritious foods to arm them with a robust immune system? I asked myself these questions as my patients walked out of the hospital doors. And I have said that science is the social justice issue of our time, and we need cures that address not just rare diseases, not just diseases like oncology, which are so key, but chronic and non-communicable diseases that disproportionately affect disadvantaged communities. Everything from diabetes to sickle cell. But that takes investment. It takes listening. It takes clinical trials that are representative of all communities. So like OHSU, Bio values diversity and believes meaningful innovation happens when you bring together people from a wide variety of backgrounds. And that's why our bioequality agenda has three main aims. First, to promote health equity and access to medicines and ensure diversity in clinical trials. Second, to invest in minority scientists and entrepreneurs. And third, to expand opportunities for women and minority groups through our purchase power, through how we collaborate with suppliers that also share those goals. So I'm heartened to see other leaders tackling this issue as well. For a long time, the NIH has needed to do more to address structural racism. Its new Unite initiative takes on some of these inequalities, from treatments to the grant-making process. It's an important first step towards ensuring more people benefit from science. So, as I said a minute ago, this is a big moment for science. COVID has galvanized scientific and medical research. From the ER to genetic labs, researchers and professionals like you are working on life-changing breakthroughs. Someone from the administration recently asked me whether the biotech industry had made any significant sacrifices during the pandemic, and I've got to tell you, I was truly taken aback. Perhaps they didn't fully think through their question or look past some of the headlines or the misperceptions about what our companies do. But I told her about the researchers' long nights and their pressure to succeed, about knowing that lab work could immediately save lives while you're still exposed to the virus as you're coming into your lab to do your work. You want to protect other families, but you also want to protect your own. And since the beginning of the pandemic, researchers at biopharma companies have responded in a tremendous way. Our companies around the world have launched more than 960 research and development programs trained to prevent or stop or treat COVID. Over 210 vaccine programs were launched in that first year. Most of this work was at small or mid-sized companies that stopped what they were doing to respond to COVID-19. These companies took a tremendous risk. Before the pandemic, many were only working on a single product or disease, so they certainly have made sacrifices. Their successes, our successes, have created greater support for science. But now it's time to capitalize on this moment. And we at Bio are actively working on your behalf and on behalf of your research. Last summer, we took a deep dive into our priorities as an organization. We surveyed our membership and reached out to stakeholders to really figure out where Bio can make the most important and consistent gains on behalf of our innovative companies. We set up new focus areas, starting with being a voice of science and for science. Science and patients must be at the center of everything we do. And Bio can be a trusted resource in all of our efforts to promote that understanding. Second, we want to make sure we empower innovators and help them engage with each other. One thing this last year has shown us is how valuable those opportunities to engage with each other, to have those conversations that lead to partnerships and breakthroughs really are. So I want to ensure you that we are fueling the bio revolution by supporting innovation, collaborations, and partnerships, not just in medicine, but also in agriculture and in the environment. Finally, we want to do everything we can to safeguard broad patient access to transformative therapies. As I mentioned before, science is a social justice issue, and affordable access is very critically important. Bio seeks to empower innovation and make sure that the fruits of your labor improve more lives. So while access is key, it's fundamental, we also have to make sure that it doesn't come at the expense of that innovation engine, which is so key and important to make sure it continues. So as we do this work, Bio will have your backs in Washington and in state capitals across the country. And that's why we push back against policies that can stifle R&D or prevent companies from being able to grow and turn a profit. And that's why we support IP protections and the innovation ecosystem, because we want good research to turn into life-saving products. We believe in holistic solutions that will really help us ensure greater access and affordability to more people, and not necessarily arbitrary controls or actions that suppress scientific advancement. So don't overlook how much policy can influence the future of the biotechnology industry, or the importance of everyone, including yourselves, standing up for science and the development of life-saving breakthroughs. Our system may not be perfect, but the United States led the way in the development of COVID vaccines and treatments. And it's because we value innovation and researchers like you. We need to make sure we continue to do so. So look, I know scientists are often single-focused, and it's what makes you great scientists. I miss that part of being at the lab bench myself. But there's also broad social context that your work fits into. Bio wants to serve as your voice and your bridge to that broader cultural conversation about what science can achieve. We will lead in that effort, but I hope you will do more than follow. I hope you'll use your voices to speak up about the benefits of science, how it can deliver new solutions to decade-old problems, how it can cut through policy debates that seemingly never end, how it can create that aha moment for everyone, from the youngest mind to the age-old skeptic. Communities need access to healthcare, but also access to novel solutions that will help them in the future. COVID showed us what's possible when we work together without relenting. And it also showed us how the benefits of science must uplift all communities and not just a few. So we can't stop now, not with this crisis far from over and a future pandemic possible if we let down our guard. To me, the choice isn't between development and access. It's about whether we support science, leaders like you, and nurture our collective ability to launch discoveries that change the course of history. So thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for doing it in these important times. I look forward to diving in deeper into these topics in our conversation, and look forward to answering your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. McMurry-Heath. We have a number of questions, but I'm going to start off with a question of my own. You were highlighting the importance of investment in research into areas that impact underrepresented communities in particular. As you know, the NIH has highlighted in the last couple of years the relatively poor success rate for Black scientists in getting NIH grants. And recently, matter of fact, just on this week, a paper came out from Mike Lauer, who was our keynote speaker on Tuesday, where they did an analysis that showed that the poor success rate of Black scientists could be attributed entirely due to the fact that they were submitting to NIH institutes with lower funding rates. And maybe to the NIH that says, okay, well, we don't have a problem with reviewers specifically reviewing grants from Black scientists relatively poorly. But it highlights a real problem in my mind, which is that the institutes that Black scientists are submitting to, and therefore are funding the type of research that they are committed to working on are relatively underfunded compared to other institutes. And so I guess my question to you, you've had experience in the public world. What can we do in order to change that dynamic? I mean, of course, there are details about how different institutes function, but I think ultimately it comes down to how the NIH institutes allocations are made, which is a decision of Congress. But I'd be interested in any insights, that you might have.
Sure. Well, it's a very important and hot topic of conversation, and I haven't had a chance to see Mike Lauer's paper, so I apologize for that. But I did recently have the opportunity to interview 5 young women, mostly women of color, but not all, who did a comprehensive analysis of NIH grant funding that was published, I believe, in Cell not too long ago. And they've been in dialogue with NIH leadership about it, which actually showed that when you held all other factors equal, including number of publications, the tier of the universities they had been trained at or were coming from, that Black scientists were actually getting funded at a much lower rate. So it's probably a combination of the two. And I've had a couple of sit downs recently with Francis Collins on this. And, he feels that there is a lot more the NIH can do, both in how they structure study sections and make sure that those study sections are not bringing any unconscious bias to the table, as well as look at some of these more systemic issues. So, like most things, it's probably not one individual cause, and there's probably not one individual solution. But I do think we have to ask ourselves, as a nation, we invest so much in the National Institutes of Health. And, I am one of those that was cheering on Harold Varmus and Research America from the sidelines as they were doubling and then tripling the NIH budget. And now we're on the precipice of talking about an ARPA-H proposal, which would add another $6.5 billion over 10 years to that research enterprise. And yet most of that funding goes out without the accountability that the rest of the federal government asks in its funding. There are no guarantees that you must have diverse slates for fundees. There's no mandate that the fundees pay attention to diversity or treat it at least at the level that the federal government does in their own hiring practices. There isn't even a question as to whether or not the research portfolio has to reflect the public health needs of the nation. And I don't think anyone's asking for more than that, but I think we do have to ask ourselves whether it's time to make sure that science funding is reflecting the priorities of the nation and that our scientists are doing everything we can to help meet those needs. And I think it's something we can easily do. There are exciting scientific questions and problems in almost any human disease area, but often as a young professor or a young graduate student, you flock to where the research dollars are, and you are interested about where the bulk of the focus is. And this, I think, we have to pay a little bit more attention to as we move forward.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat that's a natural follow-up, which is, how is Bio working with NIH and other federal agencies to support the importance of funding for biomedical research?
Yes, it's an important area for us, not just in the general NIH grant programs, which is also very, very important, but also in the SBIR grants, which help turn some of those ideas into those fledgling, starting smallest businesses, as well as working with NCATS and some of the other centers that are really focused on translating some of those great basic science breakthroughs that we make in the lab into something that helps patients. So that's something we advocate strongly for. But this accountability question, I think, is also key. I also think it's important for us to start asking, can we find a way to give NIH and actually our young scientists in training a little bit more line of sight to the entire process that it takes to turn a life science idea or breakthrough into an innovation that helps patients. I spent time on Capitol Hill and in the FDA, and it wasn't actually until I worked for a company that I actually saw the huge amount of time and resources that had to be dedicated to not just that first discovery, not even just that first in human, but the whole clinical trial enterprise, and then the whole regulatory enterprise that follows to make sure that you have a product that makes it to market deemed safe and effective. So I don't think we have enough focus on that. And you see it with the discrepancy between funding for the National Institutes of Health and FDA, for example. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to all parts of that spectrum.
Yeah, and that those sort of topics are not front and center in our graduate programs, for example. So we're not seeing that being highlighted, of course, because our graduate programs are by and large taught by bench scientists or clinician scientists who have their own particular focus. I want to just highlight a comment in the chat, just a thank you for highlighting the burden of chronic diseases and how medicine, science, and public health are not separate worlds, but connected, with one influencing the other in a powerful way. I think that's very true.
Thank you.
Another question from the chat. Can you comment on the role that philanthropy-driven research funding, as opposed to NIH, NSF, et cetera, can play in addressing disparities?
Well, when you've met one philanthropy, you've met one philanthropy. I think there's a huge amount of variation, but they can be extremely impactful. You're coming from the Pacific Northwest, and there's been a lot of attention in recent weeks to what's happening with Bill and Melinda Gates. And it's made me reflect on what a huge influence that had on shaping areas of research, and how a recent change in their approach, like in the last few years, their recognition that they wanted to pay attention not just to global health issues, but to health disparity issues in the United States, really opened up many new pathways for funding. So I think our philanthropic leaders have a responsibility. I know they want to be helpful and impactful, and no matter how big the philanthropy, it's not an unlimited source of funds. So you want to make sure you're focusing your efforts. But we have to balance how that focus may de-emphasize other areas of need. And maybe it's time for some more coordination between our philanthropic entities to make sure we're not leaving any need unmet.
So I have a list of some questions here while we're waiting for other ones in the chat. One is that kind of touches on what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. What are your thoughts on the future and overall direction of biotech/life science education in the U.S.? How can the U.S. remain a leader and competitive in the worldwide biotech industry?
Well, I like to be upbeat when I speak, but I've got to say this is one of those areas that's giving me quite a bit of pause recently, in part because I have a 9-year-old daughter, so I've watched what distance learning has done to her science education. One of the first things that has gone, not just for her, but for children of friends and family members, is that hands-on experience in the lab, because the lab is a space where many children filter in and out of all day. And so they haven't been able to have that shared space activity. And, for me personally, the difference between learning biology in a course, even a lab course, and working in a university lab completely changed my understanding of how science worked. And what I loved about science growing up was always those laboratory experiences. So I think we have to ask ourselves as a scientific community how we're going to counterbalance what we've lost over the last year in that regard, and how we re-enchant this generation with hands-on scientific research. Now, the question also referred to our leadership in this area, and you are right. The U.S. is leading in terms of the ability to produce scientific breakthroughs and make them matter to patients and consumers. But there are many other countries that are right on our heels, China among them. I had an opportunity when I was leading a global team. A large portion of my team was based in Shanghai and Shanghai and Beijing. And it was amazing to see the vast amount of federal resources, of government resources dedicated not just to the basic research like we focus on here, but to that entire product development pathway. It's an entirely different national orientation to science. It's prioritized, it's front and center, it's seen as very important to the arc of the nation overall. And we have just lost our way on that. And, recent decisions like the WTO IP waiver, while well-intentioned, have just underscored how we can't decide how we feel about our competitive place in the global scientific ecosystem. And we need to have a serious national dialogue about that.
Thank you. A question and comment here. Excellent talk from Sanjay Malhotra. Thank you for highlighting about different boats in the ocean trying to reach the same shore. Many boats are healthy while others leaky. Clearly, something is not right. Well, this actually, now I'm seeing you just commented on this. Yesterday, the Biden government decided to waive intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines, which is crucial in providing access to vaccinate people around the world. But the bio industry seems to be opposing the stand of the Biden administration. So how do you think bio can help navigate the situation and make sure that both vaccine access is available everywhere? And I think that corollary is, and intellectual property is protected.
Yeah. So let me start with what might not be obvious, but should be, which is that, our companies are incredibly committed to making sure that COVID vaccines get to every corner of the globe. I mean, these are the scientists who are detecting variants at the front line, and they know that we are in a race against the variants, and with COVID, no one is safe unless we're all safe. So let's just agree on the destination. That part is unimpeachable and totally aligned. But the front row that we've had in the difficulty developing these vaccines has shown us that it is much more complex than the headline of an IP waiver suggests. So first of all, let's start with what already happens in the WTO. WTO already has a provision that allows countries to waive IP protections in the midst of an emergency. But this WTO proposal goes further and actually obligates all the vaccine manufacturers to not just share IP, but to share any information needed to reproduce the vaccine, okay? And also commit their own company resources to going and helping countries to set up their own vaccine manufacturing. Now that can seem like the most expeditious way to get there, but when I was in FDA, I saw clearly that vaccine manufacturing is incredibly complex. For the mRNA vaccines, they have over 200 components and ingredients that go into those vaccines. And it can take 6 to 12 months to set up a vaccine manufacturing facility that can produce vaccine that is safe and effective in a reliable way. And then each time you set up one of these facilities, they have to be certified and checked by regulators. There's simply not enough personnel and expertise globally for us to reproduce vaccine manufacturing capacity around the globe. If there were, we would have already done so because our companies are trying to use every inch of vaccine manufacturing capacity that there is around the globe. And actually, our companies have licensing agreements with tens of countries around the world, including India, to produce the vaccines. So there's that. The rate limiting step is not intellectual property. The rate limiting step is human capital and the time to set up the manufacturing and the raw ingredients that go into it. And the shortage of those raw ingredients has actually been made worse by the administration's stand on the Defense Production Act. So you may recall when the administration came in, they wanted to make sure that they were prioritizing U.S. vaccine manufacturing and distribution, which is completely understandable. But in doing so, they prevented our companies from exporting a lot of the raw materials and other things that were really needed around the world to manufacture vaccines. So that has to happen first. There has to be a global supply of the ingredients if we're going to ever produce vaccines. If we could get all the global supply of ingredients to all of the currently licensed vaccine manufacturing sites, we would be much further along than we are today. And it would happen much quicker than giving poor and needy countries the chance to build their own vaccine manufacturing facilities, which may be in the long term be completely reasonable, but in the short term does nothing to stop COVID now. And then one other piece, and I know this is complex and in the weeds, but it's not a simple topic to wade into. The US has only recently entered COVAX. So COVAX is a global consortium designed to buy at the lowest cost possible vaccines from around the globe and distribute them to countries around the world based on countries' ability to pay. And it would be free from COVAX for poor countries. During the last administration, the US refused to participate in COVAX. The new administration has pledged support for COVAX, which is fantastic, but to date, we've only delivered half of our financial commitment to that enterprise, 2 of the $4 billion that we've pledged. So there is a lot that can be done right now to shore up and build up the global vaccine stores and distribute them tomorrow to countries who need them. And this is what we must focus on. So there's a lot that still needs to be done. The end goal is not in dispute. The speed and the tactics to get there in a way that not only serves patients right now, but also makes sure that there are incentives in the next pandemic for companies to pivot on a dime and respond is also important. And you may say, well, the companies should always pivot in a pandemic, and they will always pivot. Scientists are always focused on that. But it's not that simple. You have to attract not just the companies, but also the investment for those companies to do their work. And investors are not going to invest in a field that has no intellectual property protections. It's just not something that makes sense from their calculus. So, long and complicated answer, but it's an important topic.
Yeah, and of course, it's always portrayed very simplistically in the media. So I appreciate your answer. Excuse me. Another intellectual property question. It was mentioned that Bio is supportive of intellectual property for product development. As you may know, in the 1980 Bayh-Dole Act, which gives rights to universities and small businesses in the IP that they develop with federal funding, changes are being proposed that this legislation to provide the U.S. government with march in rights to control drug pricing. I don't think I quite read that question right, but in any case, what is Bio's stance on this proposed change and its potential impact on the biotech industry if it would be adopted? But you're muted.
Sorry. Well, we know what happens without Bayh-Dole. We've done that natural experiment. Before Bayh-Dole, academic progress in science did not turn into products that reach patients. It's just that simple. And we've been able to see in the decades since its introduction so much progress, and the US now really leading the globe in our ability to turn those innovations into concrete drugs and devices and solutions that really help individual patients. We were able, when we had a recent anniversary of Bayh-Dole, to find the very first patient who was saved by Bayh-Dole, and she was talking about how important it was that Bayh-Dole came along when it did to really give universities the incentive and the avenue to turn their breakthroughs into products that could get out the door. And we lose sight of that at our own peril. I think one of the biggest challenges our nation has is that we forget our history. And that's critically important in this space.
Thank you. So another question here. Would you mind telling us about some of Bio's initiatives to help regions and organizations handle structural racism and diversity in our industry?
Sure. Well, there's several underway, but our marquee one is our bioequality agenda. So we have three main planks. The first is fighting for health equity, not just in outcomes, but also in clinical trial participation and in the distribution of research. And so we've used COVID as kind of our pilot, our litmus test for how we're doing in that space. So like last fall now, we convened a group of leaders to talk about how we ensure access to COVID therapeutics. So not the vaccines now, but therapeutics. Because there was a lot of patchiness in terms of how federal government was going to support patients receiving COVID therapies when needed. And we came up with some solutions, for example, making sure that states have an easier path for federal support if they are taking care of new Medicaid patients who have COVID. Because during the pandemic, states have seen an explosion in their Medicaid rolls because of the tragic increase we've seen in unemployment. So that was something we fought for. It got incorporated into the COVID relief package, and we're really happy to see that assistance come to states. So it's very important for us to focus in those areas. We also have some clinical trial diversity proposals that are under development, and I'll have to come back next year and tell you more about the details of those and how they're progressing. The second bucket is really around talent development, and I mentioned that we're trying to support women and minority scientists and entrepreneurs that have been trained by our company. So for example, many of our companies have diversity training programs that some have been operating for decades. I, for one, was the recipient of a United Negro College Fund Merck Fellowship when I was in graduate school 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago now. And companies like Biogen, even our mid-sized companies like Biogen in Boston have trained over 250 African-American scientists in the last 10 years. But these training programs are kind of like islands. An individual company will train a cohort or several cohorts of scientists or entrepreneurs, but other companies won't have line of sight to that talent. And for our smaller companies, since Bio represents that huge continuum of size of companies, for our smaller companies that don't have the capital for those kinds of investments, they can't see that great diverse talent that has already been trained and already been identified. And so we're setting up a LinkedIn platform that is going to allow our companies to advertise those programs so that minority scientists and entrepreneurs can find those training opportunities, and then also promote the alumni of those programs so that companies throughout our 1,000 company bio network can have line of sight to that talent for hiring and promotion opportunities. And then the last bucket is around using our supply chain. So our companies have hundreds of purchasing agreements, everything from the food in their cafeteria to transportation to lab equipment. And we want to make sure that they are doing everything they can to choose companies that also prioritize diversity and inclusion when they're making those purchasing choices so that we can amplify our impact in the space.
Great, thank you. Next question, would you mind talking to us about programs or other initiatives that Bio may be rolling out or recently have rolled out that would help early stage, i.e. startup, biotech and life science companies across the country?
Yes, there's many. Let me focus a bit on SBIR because that's an area where I think is critically important. We've been trying to make sure as we work with NIH that the SBIR grant is reflecting the latest technologies, the latest business opportunities, making sure that it's more open and transparent and more simple for folks to apply. We do a lot of hands-on help at Bio. We help our smallest companies. We like to say for our smallest companies, we are your DC office, and we help them navigate things like BARDA grant applications in the Department of Health and Human Services, and that's the biodefense arm of HHS, helping them navigate FDA and understand the guidances at FDA, and also just helping them partner with each other. So we do that both through our formal partnering program. So at each of our events throughout the year, we have a huge partnering platform. At JP Morgan, we had over 10,000 partnering meetings in the course of the week. And that allows small companies, no matter where they sit in the world, to meet with tons of investors and larger companies looking to partner in quick succession. And we know time is money for our smallest companies. So that's very, very key and important. But we also help them navigate things like the pandemic. So we brought together a kind of a sharing group of our smallest companies, so folks could share, how do you shut down your facility? How do you return to work safely? How do you navigate the HR issues around the pandemic? And those have been myriad. So there's a lot of support going in those areas as well. And we set up a Craigslist of COVID partnering so that companies could find resources and share resources within each other. Even if they weren't large companies, but small companies could partner in that way. So we really see ourselves as bringing together our smallest companies and the resources that feed them, because we think that's critically important to their success.
Thank you. So it's been about 6 months since Bio released its new mission, purpose, and vision. Do you want to share more with us? Because I'm sure that most of the audience hasn't heard about these changes, and share what those changes were and what progress has been made so far.
Yeah, well, a lot of the change was in the process. So, what we had done previously is we had really focused on getting a list of legislative and policy priorities from our members, particularly our 100 board members, and kind of coalescing those into a strategy for the year. And we really realized that, we are on an ongoing fight. We are in a struggle to transform the perception and the understanding of what our companies and our scientists do over time. And this is not going to be something that's completed in 12 months. It's something we really have to commit to over time. So we set out to really define what bio really does best and why bio does what it does. And that's really educate, collaborate, and advocate. Those are the three types of activities that bio is well armed to do and does well. And we want to focus those activities. And then we also wanted to say, we are here to promote human health, to improve the climate, to really make sure that more people have access to nutritious foods. And we want to do so in a way that keeps an eye on equitable and just distribution of those great resources. So that framing language was added to our vision. Now, our 5 planks really focus on turning that into a reality. So I say be a voice of science and for science. And that should not be confused to say we're not advocating on behalf of our companies. That is something we definitely want to do, but we want to make sure that we're also speaking for the understanding of science that is sometimes unique to our companies or those that partner with our companies. And then we want to make sure that we are helping and uniting and empowering our innovators. We want to fight for access to scientific innovation. We want to drive that bioeconomic revolution so that our companies can be part of our economic recovery to COVID. And all of these things are key. And then we want to reduce barriers to innovation, because barriers to innovation around the world that are unnecessary slow everything down. I mean, one of the things we saw with COVID is that when regulators and companies work closely together, you can really cut down the timelines to regulatory approval, and doing so saves lives. So those are the key elements of our strategy, and it's been fun to kind of start to implement that within bio and really get pickup and excitement throughout our membership.
Thank you. Next question. What are your thoughts on, at this point, expanding reach into the various populations that are resistant to getting the COVID-19 vaccine? Seems with spokespeople like Rhea Boyd and Uche Blackstock, there's been some success convincing, if not physically reaching, Black communities. What do you think some strategies for moving forward might be?
So we have been deep into this issue from the earliest days, starting with helping our member companies find and partner with diverse patient populations in their clinical trials, and making sure that those clinical trials were robustly diverse, and they were some of the most diverse trials in recent history. We did everything from partnering with the National Association of Black Churches to working with the NMA, the National Medical Association, which is the Black AMA, to help partner with them in their long efforts to diversify clinical trials, as well as working with blackdoctors.org and various other groups to get out there. I cannot tell you the number of seminars and town halls we've done on this topic. But we went further as well. We actually built a website called covidvaccinefacts.org, which is still widely used, that breaks down all of the scientific information and understanding about the vaccines into language that is lay accessible and highly pictorial. So it's really accessible to people. It's available in English and Spanish. It has most of the common questions about the vaccine answered. It's an incredible resource. And in meeting with governors across the country in the late fall and early winter, they were so thankful to have this resource to refer people to help them in the understanding. And we've seen huge strides in terms of uptake of the vaccine in minority communities. There's more to do, but we've seen improvement. The latest front in this struggle, and it continues to be a struggle, is in rural communities and actually the older white male population. That's where we are finding the biggest resistance to date. And so we've recently expanded those efforts to make sure we are also reaching out to those communities as well, because as I said earlier, no one is safe until we're all safe. So it's very important that we are talking to every community in a language that they can understand and relate to about how important it is to get vaccinated. And if anyone in the audience has not yet gotten vaccinated, please do. It's so important, not just for you, but for your family and your loved ones.
I can't agree more with that. Maybe we have time for one last short question. Biotech is primarily focused and located in a few key geographies of the U.S., and sometimes difficult for small companies in other geographies to access. Is Bio working with the investment community to diversify biotech investments across the U.S.?
Yes, this is actually one of our big priorities. We actually have a team in Bio that is working on a BioHub toolkit. So we've been surveying some of the research hubs around the country that have been really successful in attracting companies, attracting investment, and making sure that those companies can find the skilled workforce to really be successful. And they've analyzed the state policies that have allowed those hubs to really flourish. And now we're starting to compile that into a cookbook so that states around the country can build their own biotech hubs. And we're finding a lot of interest in this. I think states are seeing how powerful the hub model is for driving their economies, as well as attracting overall investment and migration to the states. So the good news is the states are interested and we are giving them the tools to make it happen. But we just have to keep up the effort. And you're absolutely right. It can't be restricted to a few quarters. One of the fortunate things about the way Bio is set up is that because we also cover food and agriculture and industry and environment, we actually have members in all 50 states. And that's a really wonderful way for us to see how different states approach biotechnology and to see what types of biotechnology can really flourish in a particular region. And it's something we're strongly committed to seeing more of.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. McMurry-Heath, for speaking with us today. This has been a great hour, and I really personally thank you, and I thank you for the rest of the audience.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
You bet. Before I close, I want to thank the sponsors once again. And I also want to mention to the audience that there are a couple more events happening today to round out Research Week. At 11:30, a researcher's guide to partnering with industry. At 1 o'clock, the OHSU Innovation Showcase. And at 2:30, the OHSU Startup Company Showcase. So I would encourage all of you to attend those events. And thank you all for watching today.